So, again, no homework. This is not to be done. Do not do this. I'm not giving you points for it, extra credit or otherwise. This is not something that's in the picture. I'm trying desperately to get it out of the picture. So there you go. But I will talk to you about it right now, and we can discuss some of these ideas. So is Miranda a good idea or a bad idea? Well, maybe inherently good. Again, as I said earlier, not everybody has the benefit of taking a class like this, or maybe parents who are police officers or families that necessarily would know about constitutional rights. I mean, I've not been at this a terribly long time. 2.5 years I've been teaching this particular class. So it's not long compared to some of my colleagues. But I've had students, in the past come up and say, I have no idea that this was a thing. What is this? Do I have to talk to a police officer if he comes knocks on my door? So not everybody does have this benefit. So it's something I think that should be highly valued and highly prized in the nation we live in, that law enforcement has to tell you you have the right to an attorney, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to refuse to answer questions, because not everybody knows. And everybody, even the dirtiest scumbag you could possibly think of, deserves the benefit of law. Why do I say that? We should give that person, that scumbag, the benefit of law, because one day we might need it. And if we cut these laws down and stop and take away these procedural protections for the purpose of getting somebody, they won't be there when we need them. And that's a very scary thought, at least to me. So are the police to be trusted, or should the suspects be given the benefit of the doubt? Maybe. I mean, that's really a question only for you to answer. I think certainly maybe the body cams have helped with the number of complaints and definitively proving innocence or guilt in more recent years. But that's just, again, that's my opinion. I'm not preaching that as gospel. Should voluntary confessions be used against you in a court of law, or should everything be Mirandaized? So that's an interesting question. Should a voluntary confession be used? Yeah, I mean, if somebody, say, saw you, or you just very generally do something and voluntarily goes to the police and says, yes, he did that, I watched him do it. Well, that should be taken seriously. That should be looked into. So maybe not everything needs to be Mirandaized. But again, don't do this. I'm not giving you any points for it. No homework. All right. So the due process clause. The principle that the government should be limited in how it makes decisions that are detrimental to private people is very old. It goes back to Magna Carta, the beginning of our semester. Clause 30, again, provides no free man shall be arrested or imprisoned except by lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. This language and its subsequent refinements gave rise to the concept of due process of law and influenced the drafters of the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. So due process, it's an old concept that goes back to the beginning of the course. in case any of you were wondering why I started with Magna Carta. It really has bled into everything else that we've done this semester. Although it's a brief clause, important parts of the Supreme Court's constitutional doctrine rest on it. At the most general level, the clause reiterates the principle of the rule of law. Again, the rule of law, nobody's above the law. The government must act in accordance with legal rules and not contrary to them. So a more specific application of the clause here in this doctrine today is called procedural due process. It concerns the fairness and the lawfulness of decision-making methods that are used by the courts and the executive. The takings clause of the Fifth Amendment reads as follows: "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." This is called something that I think probably most of you would have at least heard about at some point in your schooling, a concept called eminent domain. Will this be on the final? You betcha. So the government can seize land that belongs to you, your family, your family's farm. For instance, if they feel a compelling need to build a road on it, or a hospital, or something that they think would serve the greater public good. Can they just do it? No. They have to pay you fair and square for it. Now here's another example of what fair and square, the system we have versus the one that we ought to. Your house, say you put a lot of work into your house, you've had it assessed, it's worth $250,000. The government comes, knock, knock, knock. We need to build a highway through your house. Give it to us. Okay, it's worth $250,000, you say. The government says, not so fast. We need to have our own assessors out. So the government's assessors come out. Do you think they're going to get anywhere in the ballpark of $250,000? No. Just compensation. Without just compensation is whatever the government interprets it as. Take them to court, challenge it, sure. But you're only going to get $100,000 on that house for the time being. The clause here, this takings clause, it's intended, again, if I haven't said it enough, I would know these different clauses and their names. And this is what the takings clause establishes here, eminent domain. It's intended to uphold the principle that the government should not single out isolated individuals to bear excessive burdens, even in support of an important public good. So they knock on Mr. A's door. Mr. A owns I'm a city boy, born and bred. Mr. A owns 100 acres of good, solid farmland. I don't know if that's a lot, a little. I will confess my ignorance in that matter. But the government comes and says, Mr. A, we need 50 acres of your land to build a highway through. We'll pay you $100 an acre. Not a fair price at all, I'm sure, but okay. Well, Mr. A is a good patriotic American citizen. He says, yeah, sure. Okay, then a month later, Mr. A, we need another 25 acres. We need to build an army base on that land by the road. Okay, why are you picking on me again? Well, we have the right to do this under the takings clause. It's eminent domain. We'll pay you $200 an acre. Probably not a fair price. Mr. A, we need your house now for the general to live in. Okay. The government needs to go find somebody else to bear that burden. If they're, they can't just bother one citizen. So when this happens, the payment of just compensation, it provides a means of removing any special burden if the compensation is in fact just, which is an if. The most influential statement of this principle is found in Armstrong v. U.S. The Supreme Court says the Fifth Amendment's takings clause was designed to bar government from forcing some people alone to bear public burdens which, in all fairness and justice, should be borne by the public as a whole. That's really it. That's what the takings clause is about. So for the takings clause to serve this principle effectively, the guarantee of just compensation. What is just compensation? Again, it's what the government says it is. It has to apply at the very least to cases in which the government just goes in and confiscates property. So this means more than merely the government taking a privately owned asset for itself. It also includes things like the government permanently deprives a private owner of possession of the asset, or gives the asset or the right to permanently physically occupy the asset to somebody else entirely. So this could apply to your business, this could apply to your farm, this could apply to your church, this could apply to any building, any sort of land that the government doesn't own. They have to give just compensation. So the compensation requirement doesn't only apply to land, but to all forms of public property, as I just said. At a minimum, the clause applies to government confiscation of personal property, anywhere from, it's very varied, animals to corporate stocks, and so anything. If they confiscate anything, they've got to give you some just compensation for it. The clause also applies not only to the confiscation of all existing interests in any individual piece of property, but to the confiscation of certain lesser interests in property. What are these lesser interests? Improvements, intangible things, maybe emotional attachments, maybe a child was born in that house, or somebody died in that house, or something of that sort. Lesser interests. So the clause also applies to the confiscation of intangible property, including patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets. The clause hasn't been read to apply to taxes. Of course not. It does apply when the government seizes a specific pool of money. A specific pool of money means anything from a bank account to literally a bag full of cash. Or when it will order a citizen to pay a specific amount of money. The clause prohibits the government from just confiscating property, even with just confiscation, if it is not doing so for a public use. Hey, I'm the Secretary of the Interior. I think that my house needs to be built on, my new house needs to be built on 500 acres worth of land. I need a big estate because I'm the Secretary of the Interior. I'm an important person in the administration. No, not so fast. I can't do that under the Fifth Amendment. Not for public use. So although the boundaries of this prohibition are controversial, it encompasses at a minimum situations in which the government takes property from A for the purpose of giving it to B, solely for B's private benefit. So the second example I just used. And this phrase, just compensation, means that the owner of the property will receive at a minimum the fair market value of the property and its best alternative use, independent of the government taking. That is what it means. Does it happen? In most instances here, the compensation required, it's cash payment, but in some situations, compensation may come in the form of some reciprocal or return benefit given to a party, like an increase in the value of retained land when the government builds a road over that property. So they'll give you maybe an interest in whatever they're doing with the property of yours that they're confiscating in lieu of a cash payment. So under the takings clause, the government doesn't have to compensate private property owners when it requires them to take reasonable steps to avoid pollution or other releases that harm either public or private property in land, air, and water. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, would be the ones who would probably make that determination. And just as anything that involves human beings, it's ripe for abuse. If we were in class, I'd spend some time telling you stories about EPA shenanigans and other governmental entities, but we do need to move on. So anytime some sort of private party could seek a court order stopping another private party from engaging in harmful activities, the government can impose the same limitations through fines and court orders with no duty to compensate.